The sun over southern Arizona was an unforgiving tyrant that afternoon, burning down upon the land until the horizon seemed to waver like a mirage. Dust lifted in slow spirals from wagon wheels and Boots as the small frontier town of Dos Muertos, prepared for a wedding, though everyone in town knew it wasn't a happy one. The bell above the church swung lazily in the wind, its dull clang echoing through the empty street. There were no flowers, no music, no laughter, just heat, dust, and the stench of whiskey and fear. Inside a small, clapboard house behind the general store, Evelyn Carter sat before a cracked mirror, her pale hands trembling as she tried to fasten the veil that covered her dark hair. She was 23, too young to have her life already decided, too proud to show her tears. Her reflection stared back with hollow eyes, the color of storm clouds before the rain. Her father, Thomas Carter, paced behind her. The years had not been kind to him, a once honest cattleman now reduced to a trembling debtor. Cards, whiskey, and failed harvests had chewed through everything he owned. When Clive Maddox, the richest rancher in 3 counties, offered to erase those debts in exchange for Evelyn's hand, Thomas had hesitated, but only for a moment. "You'll be well taken care of," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "Better than with a father who's got nothing left." Evelyn turned from the mirror, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Taken care of? Like a horse bought at auction?" Thomas winced. "You don't understand the world, girl. Maddox can protect you. The desert ain't kind to women alone." "The desert," she whispered bitterly, "isn't half as cruel as the man you've sold me to." There was no reply, only the creak of boots, the rasp of dust-laden air, and the sound of her father's shame as he walked out the door. At the church, Clive Maddox waited, a broad-shouldered man with a black coat and a scar running down his jaw like a mark of the devil himself. His gray eyes were cold as riverstones, and when he smiled, the whole town seemed to shrink back. He owned most of the land within a day's ride, and every man in town either worked for him or owed him something. When Evelyn arrived, the crowd parted in silence. Her dress was white, though the hem was already brown with dust. She looked like a ghost walking toward her own grave. Clive offered his arm, his grip tight and possessive. "Don't dawdle, sweetheart," he said under his breath. "A man don't like to wait for what's his." The preacher, a thin, nervous man named Reverend Poole, stood behind the pulpit, sweating through his collar. His voice trembled as he read from the worn Bible. Every word felt heavy, wrong, and final. "Do you, Evelyn Carter, take this man?" Her heart pounded. She thought of running, of bolting through the doors and into the open desert. But where would she go? The nearest town was 50 miles away, and Maddox's men rode faster than the wind. The Reverend's voice faded into a blur. "Do you, Clive Maddox?" "Yeah," Clive said, loud and certain. "And do you, Evelyn?" Evelyn closed her eyes. Her lips barely moved. "God forgive me." The preacher's voice quavered. "Then by the laws of man and the eyes of God, I pronounce you." "Don't say it," Evelyn whispered. But he did. Husband and wife. The room seemed to tilt. The people filed out quickly, eager to escape the tension that hung like smoke. No one dared meet her eyes. By the time she stepped outside, the wind had risen, whipping her veil into her face like a ghost's hand. Clive led her to the wagon, smiling for the crowd. But his smile faded the moment they turned the corner. His hand shot out and gripped her wrist tight enough to make her flinch. "From now on," he said quietly, "you'll learn to keep your tongue. You'll wear what I tell you, speak when I tell you, and smile when I tell you. You're Mrs. Maddox now. Start acting like it." Evelyn looked at him with quiet fury. "You may own this land, Clive Maddox, but you'll never own me." He laughed. "We'll see about that." That night, the Maddox ranch glowed under the lanterns. The air smelled of mesquite smoke and spilled bourbon. Clive's men drank, laughed, and gambled while Evelyn sat alone in her new room, a grand, cold space that felt more like a cell. Outside her window, the desert stretched into forever. The stars burned fiercely, unblinking, indifferent. Somewhere out there, she imagined freedom waiting, but freedom was as distant as the moon. She stood at the window, staring out, and whispered a prayer. "If anyone hears me, anyone at all, please let me be free." Far away, beyond the ridges and the sagebrush plains, a lone figure sat by his fire, a man whose life was bound to silence. His name was Taza of the Chiricahua Apache, His long hair caught the firelight, his face marked by the faded white streaks of old war paint. He was the last of his line, a warrior who had sworn a blood vow never again to raise arms against the white settlers, no matter their cruelty. Years ago, Clive Maddox had led a raid against his people, burning their camp, killing his brother, and driving the survivors into the mountains. In his grief, Taza's father had made him swear to the spirits, "No more blood, my son. Let peace be your strength," and for years Taza obeyed. He watched the valley from afar, living like a shadow in the canyons and unseen, unheard, untouched by the world, until that night. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound and a woman's cry, sharp and breaking. He rose, every muscle tensed. From the ridge he could see the glow of Maddox's ranch, and though the distance was great, the sound of that cry seemed to pierce the desert itself. Taza stared into the flames, his dark eyes haunted. The vow bound him, but something older and deeper stirred, something he could not name. The Apache believed that some spirits were born in pairs, two halves of one fire, destined to find each other no matter the barriers of blood or tribe. He tried to look away. He told himself it was not his fight, but the sound of that cry, the plea in it, would not leave his ears. He clenched his fists. The blood vow was sacred, sealed with the spirit of his ancestors. Breaking it meant dishonor. It meant exile from his people's memory. But the desert wind whispered again, carrying the faint echo of Evelyn's voice, not words, but the pain beneath them. And for the first time in years, Taza felt his heart move. He stood, picked up his bow, and looked toward the horizon where the ranch lights flickered like fireflies against the dark. Under his breath, he whispered in Apache, "Forgive me, Father." Then, like the coming of a storm, he disappeared into the night. In that moment, two paths, one of chains, one of silence, began to twist together under the same sky. Evelyn Carter, the woman sold into bondage, and Taza, the warrior bound by a vow of peace, were both prisoners of fate, but fate, like the desert wind, cannot be tamed. And somewhere between the canyon shadows and the starlit plains, destiny was beginning to ride. The next dawn crept across the desert like a shy ghost, pale light spilling over the mesas, catching the silver edges of cactus spines and the faint shimmer of dew on the sage. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, slicing through the morning quiet. Taza sat atop a sandstone ridge, his Mustang grazing below, and watched the valley slowly wake. The sun's warmth crept over his skin, bronzed and scarred from years of battles and exile. He hadn't spoken to another living soul in months, not since the old trader at Santa Lucia Crossing who'd sold him salt and bullets and muttered that Clive Maddox had taken a new wife, a young one, unwilling. He had ignored the words then, keeping to his vow. But last night, when her cry had carried across the land like a spirit's lament, that vow had cracked like dry clay. He closed his eyes now and whispered the old Apache prayer to the east wind. "Forgive me, ancestors. I walk again upon the forbidden path." The blood vow had been made when he was only a boy, the day his father died in his arms. Maddox's riders had come to the canyon under the flag of trade, bringing whiskey and lies. They had left with stolen horses and blood on their boots. Taza had wanted vengeance then. His blood had burned for it. But his dying father had gripped his wrist, forcing him to listen through pain and smoke. "You are the last, my son. If you spill blood, the spirits will curse your line. If you forgive, our people may one day live again." So Taza had sworn it. Never again to raise his weapon against the white man, never again to answer hatred with hatred. He had become a man of silence, living alone in the canyons, surviving off the land, avoiding the world. But now that oath bound him like a chain, one he felt grinding against his soul every time he thought of the woman's scream. By midday he saddled his horse, a tall roan stallion named Ghostwind, and rode toward Maddox's ranch. He moved like a shadow through the desert, blending with the rocks and scrub. Every movement was deliberate, silent. The way of a warrior never truly leaves him. As he rode, he remembered his mother's words, long ago. The spirits send signs to those who still listen. When you hear the same cry twice, it is not mortal sound. It is fate calling your name. And he had heard that cry. Twice. The Maddox Ranch sprawled across the valley like a fortress. Acres of dry land fenced with barbed wire, a dozen men patrolling with rifles slung low. Smoke rose from the blacksmith's shed. Dogs barked at the scent of something they couldn't see. From a ridge a half-mile away, Taza watched. Through the shimmering heat, he could make out Evelyn, standing in the corral, her white dress dusty and torn, her hair loose and glinting like dark copper in the sun. Even from a distance he saw the slump of her shoulders, the quiet defeat in her stance. Maddox appeared beside her, shouting something, striking her across the face. She fell against the fence rail, clutching it to keep from collapsing. Taza's hands trembled on the reins. His breath came heavy and slow. The vow screamed inside him. The promise, the warning, the ghosts of his ancestors whispering, "Do not." But another voice, softer, human, whispered back, "No spirit should live in chains." That voice was his own. He turned ghost wind and rode back toward the canyon, his thoughts raging like thunder. The desert sky darkened. Storm clouds began to gather. He stopped by a dry riverbed where the ashes of his last campfire still lay cold. There, he drew his knife and pressed the blade against his palm. "By my blood," he said aloud, his voice raw and deep, "I break the vow that binds me. Let my father's spirit know, I do not fight for vengeance, but for freedom." Blood trickled down, dark and warm, sinking into the thirsty sand. A wind rose suddenly, circling him, lifting dust and ash. Somewhere in that wind he could almost hear a whisper. His father's voice, not in anger, but sorrowful acceptance. The storm broke over the valley that night. Rain fell hard over the ranch, turning the dirt to slick red mud. Maddox's men cursed and scrambled to get the horses under cover. In the main house, Evelyn stood by the window, watching the lightning streak across the hills. She had grown thinner in just a week, her wrists marked from Clive's grip, her lips pale and bloodless. Every night she dreamed of escape, but the desert outside was wide and merciless. Clive's boots thudded across the floor behind her. He smelled of tobacco and cruelty. "Get away from that window," he barked. "You'll catch a chill." She turned, unflinching. "Maybe that's what I want." He narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. "You think you're clever, huh? You better learn, girl. I don't like rebellion in my house." Her chin lifted. "And I don't like living in hell." He struck her then. Not hard enough to break her, but enough to remind her who owned her. She didn't cry. She only looked at him with that same storm in her eyes that once made men fall in love and others fall to their knees. That night, when Clive finally passed out in his chair, a bottle of whiskey dangling from his hand, Evelyn crept to her window and pressed her forehead to the glass. The rain had stopped. The air outside was cold and clean. Somewhere out there she imagined the spirit of freedom moving. Wild, invisible, unstoppable. She whispered again into the night, "Please, if anyone hears me." Far beyond the corral, hidden behind the slope of the mesa, Taza sat astride Ghostwind watching. The rain dripped from his hair and shoulders. The fire of his vows breaking still burned in his chest. He had painted his face in the ancient way, white ash over the brow, streaks of red clay down his cheeks, the mark of one who walks between life and death. When he saw her silhouetted in the window, her small hand pressed against the glass, something inside him hardened into purpose. "Tonight," he murmured, "the storm rides again." He waited until the moon rose high, silvering the drenched world. Then, like a shadow given form, he moved, 2 guards by the barn. Down in silence, a knife hilt to the skull. One dog, muzzled with his hand before it could bark. He moved through the darkness, every sense sharp. The old instincts of the warrior came alive within him, the rhythm of the hunt, the heartbeat of the earth beneath his feet. When he reached her window, he tapped once. Evelyn froze, her heart lurching. Slowly she turned and saw him, a face fierce yet calm, eyes like obsidian fire, a body cloaked in rain and shadow. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. He lifted a finger to his lips. "No sound," he whispered. His voice was low, rough but not unkind. "If you wish to live, come with me." Evelyn stared, trembling. "Who are you?" "Taza," he said simply. "The one who heard your cry." Something in his tone, a quiet conviction, a strength untouched by cruelty, made her believe. Without another word, she gathered her shawl and climbed through the window into the storm-dark night. Behind them, thunder rolled across the sky like the drumming of ancient spirits. As they rode off into the canyon, Evelyn clung to him, her fingers gripping the leather strap across his chest. She didn't know where they were going, or why this man, this stranger, had risked his life for her. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. The desert wind rose again, fierce and alive, carrying away the last echo of her captivity. And as the ranch lights faded behind them, so did the last trace of the woman in chains. The desert night swallowed them whole. Wind rushed across the open plain, cool and wild after the storm, carrying the smell of wet sage and burnt mesquite. The moon had broken through a torn veil of clouds, casting long silver shadows over the rocky land. Evelyn held on to Taza's waist as his Mustang thundered through the darkness, its hooves striking sparks from the stones. Her pulse still raced from the escape, the sound of the dogs barking, the shouts of the ranch hands fading behind them, and the cold bite of freedom against her cheeks. For the first time since her forced wedding, she was beyond the reach of Clive Maddox. But fear still gnawed at her. Maddox was a man who didn't lose what he thought was his. He'd follow, with guns, with men, with fire. Taza didn't speak for hours. His focus was the trail ahead, his body moving with the rhythm of his horse. His silence was not cold. It was steady, purposeful like the hum of the earth itself. Evelyn watched the set of his jaw, the way his dark hair streamed back with the wind, and something in her heart, long silent, began to stir. They rode until dawn broke, painting the desert in gold and blood. When the sun rose fully, Taza guided Ghostwind off the trail into a canyon where a trickle of water ran through smooth red rock. There he finally stopped. He dismounted without a word and helped Evelyn down. Her legs trembled when they touched the ground. "You are safe here," he said, his voice low, deep. "No one finds this place but the wind." Evelyn looked around. The canyon was narrow and high-walled, filled with birdsong and the whisper of running water. Wildflowers clung to the stones, blooming defiantly in the hard land. She sank to her knees by the stream, cupping cold water to her lips, and for the first time in weeks, she cried. Not the desperate tears of fear, but of release. Taza stood nearby, silent, giving her space. His eyes softened as he watched her, not with pity but with a kind of reverence. When her sobs finally slowed, he knelt beside her. "You ran with courage," he said. "Many would not," she laughed bitterly. "Courage? I ran because I was afraid," he shook his head. "Fear is no shame. Fear shows you still have something worth living for." Evelyn looked up at him. "And what do you live for, Taza?" He hesitated. His gaze drifted toward the rising sun. "Once my people, now I do not know." Something unspoken passed between them then, something deeper than words. Two souls adrift, both marked by loss, both chained by things beyond their control. They rested through the day. Taza caught a rabbit with his bow and roasted it over a small fire, his movements precise and quiet. Evelyn tried to help, but he waved her off gently. "Your hands are not made for this," he said. She smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what I've had to learn." He looked at her again, truly looked this time. Beneath the dirt and torn dress, she was strong, the kind of strength that doesn't shout but endures. He had seen warriors break under less. When night came again, Taza spread a blanket near the fire and sat across from her. The stars burned bright above them, sharp and infinite. Evelyn broke the silence first. "You said you heard me cry. From that far away?" He nodded slowly. "Sound travels on the wind. The spirits carry it. I thought it was a dream until I saw you. And you came for me. I came because I could not do nothing." She studied him, her heart tightening. "You risked everything, your life. Your vow," his eyes darkened. "Yes, I broke a sacred oath. My father's spirit will not rest easy. But you did it for me?" she asked softly. Taza's gaze met hers. "No, I did it because no soul, Apache or white, should live in chains. You were the cry of freedom I could not ignore." For a long time neither spoke. The fire crackled and the desert wind murmured through the canyon like an old song. Evelyn felt the heat rise in her chest, something she hadn't felt since before her life had been stolen by that forced marriage. She looked at the man before her, the warrior who had ridden through storm and darkness to free her, and she knew her life had changed forever. By the third day, they began to move again. Taza knew Maddox would send men to hunt them. The desert left no mercy for those who lingered. They rode north, keeping to hidden trails along the foothills of the Sierra Madres. Evelyn learned to move quietly, to drink from the cactus, to read the sky. Under Taza's patient guidance, she began to feel the rhythm of the land, the hum of cicadas, the breath of the wind, the deep silence between the stars. Sometimes, he would point out tracks, deer, coyote, jackrabbit, and teach her their meaning. Everything leaves a story, he told her. You only need to learn how to listen. At night, she told him about her life before Maddox, how her mother had taught her to play the piano in a house long gone, how her father had once been gentle before the whiskey took him. Taza listened, his expression unreadable, but his eyes always steady on her. When she asked about his people, his voice grew softer. They were proud. They lived by the law of the wind and the mountain, but now, we are ghosts on our own land. Evelyn reached across the fire and touched his hand, lightly, uncertainly. You are not a ghost, Taza. He looked at her hand on his. Maybe not anymore. One night they camped near a stretch of sandstone cliffs where petroglyphs marked the walls. Spirals, animal shapes, suns and stars carved by hands long gone. Taza traced one of the carvings with his fingertips. My ancestors, he said. They believed love was not just between man and woman, but between soul and spirit, earth and sky. All things connected. Evelyn stood beside him, staring at the carvings. I think your people were right. He turned to her then, his face close enough that she could see the faint scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, the one the firelight softened instead of hiding. For a long moment, the world around them fell silent. No wind, no insects, only the steady thrum of two hearts learning to beat in the same rhythm. Taza's hand lifted slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't move away. You are not afraid? He asked quietly. Not anymore, she whispered. And then he kissed her. It was not the hurried, possessive touch of Clive Maddox's cruelty. It was something sacred, slow, reverent, and filled with all the words neither of them could speak. When it ended, Evelyn pressed her forehead to his chest, her tears mixing with the smell of dust and smoke. What happens now? She asked. Taza's arm tightened around her. Now we run until we are free. Until even the wind cannot find us, but freedom in the desert was never simple. The next morning, Taza saw smoke rising in the distance, too dark, too deliberate to be a campfire. Maddox's riders were near. He mounted Ghost Wind swiftly. We go east, he said. Evelyn didn't question him. She climbed up behind him, her hands gripping his sides. They rode through the rising heat, dust swirling around them like the breath of an angry god. Behind them, faint but growing, came the echo of hoofbeats. Pursuit. Taza's jaw clenched. Hold tight, he warned. And as they rode into the heart of the desert, the land itself seemed to tremble, the sky bruising with storm clouds again, the horizon blazing red like the promise of both danger and destiny. For Evelyn, fear and faith tangled together in her chest. For Taza, the vow he'd broken burned deeper with every mile. But neither looked back. Because now they weren't just running for freedom, they were riding for love. The desert morning broke red and harsh, the sun rising like a blade over the rim of the earth. The air shimmered with heat already, though the day had barely begun. Evelyn woke to the sound of wind scraping through the canyon and the faint rhythm of Taza sharpening his knife against stone. Sparks flew in the dim light, bright and brief, like the fragile hope they carried between them. For days they had ridden east, through jagged hills and dust plains, hiding their trail among dry riverbeds. Their horses were lean, their water skins lighter than they should have been. Still, Evelyn had never felt so alive. Each sunrise felt like a promise, each sunset like a quiet victory against the man she once called husband. But deep down, both she and Taza knew the truth. Clive Maddox would not stop. Back at the ranch, Maddox had returned from his drunken stupor to find his wife gone, his men beaten and his pride torn to shreds. The sight of his bloodied foreman lying half-conscious by the corral had ignited a fury that burned hotter than the desert sun. "She's with that Apache bastard," one of the hands had croaked. "He took her, boss, and rode off north." Maddox's face twisted with rage. "No Apache takes what's mine and lives to tell it." He gathered his best riders, 10 men hardened by greed and gunpowder, and swore them a bounty. "Bring her back alive," he ordered, voice like gravel, and the savage, "I want his head." Word spread fast. By noon the posse rode out, rifles slung, horses kicking up clouds of red dust that blotted out the horizon. 3 days later, in a quiet gorge lined with mesquite and juniper, Evelyn felt the first tremor of danger. They had stopped to rest, Taza tending to Ghost Wind's hooves, Evelyn collecting dry twigs for the fire. The sun had dipped low, painting the rocks in copper and gold. But the air felt wrong, still, tense like the desert holding its breath. Taza straightened, eyes narrowing. "We are being followed." Evelyn froze. "How do you know?" He touched 2 fingers to the ground, then lifted them, showing a faint trace of hoofprints in the dust. Wide apart, deep, fresh. 4 men close, a chill ran through her. "Maddox." His eyes met hers, dark and steady. "Yes." He packed the firestones swiftly, his every motion sure and economical. "We ride when the moon rises. Until then, silence." Evelyn nodded, but her hands shook as she rolled the blanket. Every rustle of wind, every creak of branch made her heart jump. She tried to speak, to ask him what would happen if Maddox caught them, but the words wouldn't come. Taza noticed. Without looking up, he said quietly, "Fear is not your enemy. It reminds you to live." She swallowed hard. "And what if we can't outrun them?" He finally turned to her, his expression calm but fierce. "Then we fight. Together." That night, under a swollen moon, they rode hard through the narrow pass of Red Mesa Ridge, the path twisting like a serpent between walls of blood-colored stone. The wind screamed through the canyon, masking the sound of pursuit, until the first rifle shot split the night. "Down!" Taza shouted. The bullet struck a rock near Evelyn's shoulder, spraying her with shards of stone. She ducked low, clutching Taza's waist as Ghost Wind leapt forward. Another shot echoed, and then another. The posse had found them. Taza turned sharply into a side ravine, his horse's hooves sliding on loose gravel. Evelyn dared a glance back. Torchlight flickered behind them like fireflies from hell. Maddox's men were closing in. Taza guided Ghost Wind higher into the hills, the trail narrowing dangerously. The horse strained, foam streaking its flanks. Evelyn could hear Maddox's voice shouting in the distance, raw and furious. "There's nowhere to run, you filthy half-breed. I'll hang you from your own horse." The sound cut through her like a knife. She clutched Taza's arm tighter. "He'll never stop," she whispered. Taza's jaw tightened. "Then we make him stop." By dawn, they reached a small plateau overlooking a dry basin below. Taza dismounted, scanning the terrain. "We cannot run forever," he said. "This placement will end here." Evelyn shook her head, fear rising again. "You can't face them all. There are too many." He looked at her, calm and steady. "I have faced more. And the spirits ride with me." Before she could answer, he pressed something into her hands, a small silver charm carved in the shape of a hawk. "My mother's," he said. "For protection." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Don't give this to me. You may need it." He smiled faintly, that quiet, knowing smile she'd grown to love. "I already have what I need." Then he was gone, moving into the rocks, setting traps and positioning himself between boulders like a shadow preparing to strike. Evelyn crouched behind a fallen tree, her heart hammering as dust rose on the horizon. The riders came fast, Maddox in the lead, his black coat snapping like wings. When he saw her, he reined in hard. "Evelyn," he shouted. "You come down here right now." She stood slowly, defiance in every line of her body. "You'll never have me again, Clive?" He sneered. "You're my wife." "You think that savage can change what's written by law?" Her voice rang out across the canyon. "Law?" she said bitterly. "The only law I follow now is the wind." Maddox raised his rifle. "Then the wind will carry your bones." But before he could fire, a sharp whistle split the air. A blur moved from the rocks above. Taza. He struck like a hawk descending from the sky, his knife flashing. 2 riders went down before they could even aim. Another fired wild, missing in panic. Evelyn watched, frozen between terror and awe. Taza fought with a grace born of desperation and spirit, silent, swift, deadly. He moved like the desert itself, each motion inevitable, unstoppable. But Maddox was no fool. He drew his revolver and fired. The shot hit Taza's shoulder, spinning him backward. Evelyn screamed, "Taza!" Maddox laughed. "That's what you traded me for? A bleeding savage?" Rage surged through her. She ran forward, grabbed a fallen rifle, and leveled it at her husband. Her hands shook, tears streaming down her face. "Don't make me do this," she warned. Maddox smirked. "You don't have it in you." Another shot cracked, and not hers. Taza, bleeding and staggering, had fired from the rocks. The bullet struck the barrel of Maddox's gun, twisting it from his hand. Lightning split the sky. Sudden, violent. The air went wild. A sandstorm rose from the basin like a living beast, roaring with wind and grit. Maddox cursed, stumbling backward, blinded. "You can't hide behind weather," he shouted. But the storm grew fierce, swirling around them. Evelyn felt herself pulled toward the ground, shielding her face. Through the maelstrom, she saw Taza rise, blood streaming down his arm, eyes burning with something beyond mortal strength. He shouted something in Apache, a war chant, raw and powerful, and the wind seemed to answer. A crack of thunder, a flash of light, and when the storm broke, Clive Maddox lay still on the rocks below, a jagged wound on his temple. His own bullet, deflected by stone, had ended him. The storm passed, leaving the desert drenched and silent. Evelyn crawled toward Taza, who had collapsed near the edge of the plateau. His breath was shallow, his skin pale. She gathered him into her arms, pressing his head to her chest. "Stay with me," she whispered desperately. "You can't leave me now." His eyes fluttered open, faint but full of warmth. "The vow. It's done," he murmured. "No more blood." Evelyn sobbed, brushing his hair back from his face. "Don't you dare die on me, Taza. The world would lose its heart." He smiled weakly. "Then I must live. For yours." The wind calmed. The sun broke through the clouds, painting the wet rocks gold. Evelyn held him close, the scent of rain and blood mingling in the air. And though the desert stretched silent around them, something deeper stirred. The feeling that the worst was over. The cruel man was gone, the blood vow was broken, and love, fragile but fierce, had survived the storm. The desert dawn came quietly that morning, not with the harsh glare of heat, but with the soft gold of forgiveness. The storm had passed, leaving the air cool and clean, the scent of rain still clinging to the red earth. For the first time in years, Evelyn Maddox, no Evelyn of the White Mesa now, felt the world exhale. Beside her, Taza lay resting in the shallow cave they'd found at the foot of the ridge. His shoulder wound was bound with strips of linen torn from her petticoat. The bleeding finally stopped. His breathing was steady but faint, like the whisper of wind through sagebrush. Evelyn sat beside him, watching as the first fingers of sunlight crept over the canyon walls. She had barely slept, too afraid that if she closed her eyes, he might slip away. When his eyelids fluttered open at last, she caught her breath. "You live," she whispered, a tremor of joy in her voice. Taza's lips curved faintly. "A warrior cannot die while the hawk still flies." She laughed softly, though tears filled her eyes. "You sound like the wind itself." He smiled, that small, quiet smile that carried more meaning than any vow. "The wind carried you to me," he said, "and now it carries us both." For 2 days, Evelyn nursed him. She gathered herbs the Apache women had once shown her. Prickly pear salve for infection, yucca root poultice to draw out the fever. She boiled water from a nearby spring, fed him what little they had left, and stayed by his side through every shiver and sigh. When he slept, she spoke softly to him, telling him stories of her childhood back east, of green meadows and apple blossoms, of how her mother used to hum by the fire. He would not answer, but his hand would tighten around hers as if to say, "I hear you, little flame. I'm still here." At night, when coyotes howled in the distance, she whispered prayers, half to the God she'd grown up with, half to the spirits of the land that Taza had taught her to respect. Somewhere between those prayers, she realized something. She no longer belonged to the world she'd come from. The ranch, the church, the fine dresses, all those trappings had been cages. Out here among the whispering mesas and endless stars, she was free. By the third morning, Taza was strong enough to stand. His movements were slow, deliberate, but there was strength in the set of his shoulders. Evelyn helped him to the edge of the canyon, where the sun spread gold over the desert floor. He looked out in silence for a long time. Then he spoke. "The vow is broken." Evelyn frowned slightly. "The blood vow?" He nodded. "When my father was slain by the settlers, I swore to spill blood for blood. It was my curse, my way of honoring the dead. But love," he said, glancing at her, "is stronger than vengeance. You showed me that." Her heart ached at the rawness of his tone. "And what about your people? Will they forgive you for breaking it?" He turned to her fully, eyes deep as the canyon itself. "They will understand. A warrior fights for peace, not war. I fight no more." Evelyn reached for his hand, fingers trembling. "Then let's start again, somewhere the past can't find us." He nodded, though a shadow crossed his face. "There is a place," he said after a pause, "beyond the San Pedro River near the Sacred Hills. My people call it the Valley of the Sky. The soil is kind, the water clear. We could live there." Her lips parted, hope flickering like firelight. "Together?" He smiled faintly. "Always." Their journey took them south through the heart of the high desert where the land rolled in waves of ochre and gold. The path was long and rough, days of riding under sun and stars, sleeping by small fires and living on what they could hunt or find. But it was also peaceful. Each day Evelyn grew stronger. The ache in her soul, once raw and unending, and began to heal. She learned to ride bareback, to track by the position of the sun, to hear meaning in the cry of hawks. At night, Taza taught her his language, the Apache words for sky, fire, home, and love. She stumbled through the sounds, laughing, and he would correct her gently, his voice low and tender. One evening, as the stars came out, he said softly, "In my tongue, Ayo Aninishni means I love you beyond this life." Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining. "Then Ayo Aninishni Taza." He touched her cheek, reverent as a man touching something sacred. "And Ayu, White Flame." Weeks later, they reached the valley. It was more beautiful than anything Evelyn had imagined. A stretch of green nestled between crimson cliffs, with a river winding through fields of wild sage. Cottonwoods shimmered along the banks, their leaves whispering in the wind. Birds darted over the water, flashes of color against the endless blue sky. "This," Evelyn breathed, tears filling her eyes. "This is paradise," Taza nodded. "The Valley of the Sky," he said. "A place where the earth remembers peace." They built a small cabin together near the river, stone by stone, board by board. The walls rose slowly, lovingly, with laughter and soft words filling the space between labor. Evelyn planted a patch of corn and wildflowers beside it. Taza carved charms of bone and wood to hang at the doorway, symbols of protection and renewal. When the cabin was finished, Taza stood before her, solemn and still. "There is one vow left to make," he said. Evelyn tilted her head. "A vow?" He took her hands. "Not of blood," he said. "Of heart." That evening, under a sky painted with fire and dusk, they stood together by the riverbank. Taza had woven a strand of eagle feathers and beads into a circle, the Apache symbol of unity. He placed it around her wrist, his voice low and steady. "Evelyn of the White Mesa, I vow my spirit to yours. No law of man, no curse of blood shall break it." She took his hand, her voice trembling but sure. "Taza of the Wind People, I vow my heart to yours. No distance, no death shall take it," he smiled. "Then we are one." And there, beneath the first rising stars, he kissed her, not with the hunger of survival, but with the tenderness of peace finally found. The river murmured softly beside them, carrying away the last echoes of pain. The years passed gently in the Valley of the Sky. Seasons turned. The rains came, the grass grew high, and the cabin became a home. Evelyn would sit by the doorway in the evenings, watching the horizon while Taza worked the land. Sometimes children from a nearby Apache camp would come to trade berries or listen to her stories of faraway towns. And every night, when the moon rose, Taza would light a small fire outside their home and whisper a prayer, not of vengeance, but gratitude. Evelyn would join him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you think they know?" she'd ask quietly. "Your people, my family, that we're still here?" He'd smile, watching the embers dance. "They know. The land carries all stories. Ours will live in the wind." On the first spring after their 5th year in the valley, Evelyn gave birth to a daughter. Her hair was black as night, her eyes pale like the morning sky. They named her Cielea, meaning born of two worlds. When Taza held her for the first time, he whispered something in Apache, words Evelyn only half understood, but felt deep in her soul. Later that night, as the baby slept in her arms, Evelyn looked up at the stars and thought of all that had come before. The cruelty, the fear, the blood, and the vow. All of it had led here, to this quiet, perfect peace. She leaned close to Taza and murmured, "We broke the blood vow, but in doing so we wrote a new one." He smiled softly. "A vow of love." The wind stirred through the grass, carrying the scent of rain and sage. Somewhere far above, a hawk cried, the same hawk that had once watched over them on that desperate day. And as the dawn spread its golden light over the valley of the sky, Evelyn and Taza, once bound by pain, now joined by love, began the rest of their forever.